Okay, welcome to this A-level Buddhism section 15 anthology uh, analysis. Let's read A.L. Basham's section here. Unlike the prodigal's father in the Christian story, who kills the fatted calf for his long-lost son, the father of the Buddha story makes his son undergo a very long period of humble probation before raising him to the position which he merits by his birth. The heavenly Buddha cannot raise beings immediately from the filth and poverty of the earthly gutter to the full glory of his own heavenly palace, for they are so earthbound that if brought to it at once, they would suffer agonies of fear, embarrassment, and confusion, and might well insist on returning to the gutter again. So they must undergo many years of preparation for their high estate, toiling daily amongst the material dross of this world, earnestly and loyally striving to make the world a tidier place. Like the Father in the story, the heavenly Buddha will cover his glory with earthly dust. And it continues in the next section. We're going to pause it here. And we have here a footnote that says the text itself purports to give an interpretation of the parable in which the son toiling as a menial servant in his father's house is compared to a Hinayana monk who's unaware of the true glory of enlightenment, to which he is heir. There's little doubt, however, that the story here, turned to the purposes of sectarian propaganda, was originally meant to have a wider significance, and we believe our interpretation to be that demanded by the spirit of the parable. So, what's going on here? Well, this is all of Basham's summary of the story and his commentary as well. So, what is this narrative that is being contrasted between the two stories that Basham, in the way that Basham amplifies it, and why does he amplify it in the way he does? So, Basham here is contrasting, in a way, that what would happen in the context of the Jewish story. In the Jewish story, the celebration would have been a whole village celebration. This would have been done as much as a protective act by the father to say, yes, this son has offended me and offended our village, and you as the village, as much as me as the father, have a right to punish, even kill this boy. But I, as the father, am saying he's my son, he's under my protection. You can't touch my son, no matter how much he's disgraced me and, frankly, disgraced our community. So the atonement, the act of done by the Father, is entirely unmerited. It is graceful. And this is a real contrast with the Buddhist story. The contrast of salvation. The Theravada would say, but not Mahayana, must be in part to be atoned for by the devotee, by abject humiliation. That's certainly a Theravada approach, but it's not. There's still something in the Mahayana here. Think, for example, of Mahayana Tibetan prostrations practiced in Tibetan Buddhism, or the Pure Land Buddhist who chants all day long, Nembutsu, Nembutsu. Basham here is aware of his stark differences between the narratives. But Basham is skirting around some debates. So we've just had the father killing the fatted calf here. And next we have this debate here. A very long period of humble probation. He's skirting these debates. Perhaps Basham is thinking of the contrast between Christian teaching of the immediate realization of salvation. Perhaps the thief on the cross, and Jesus saying to the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. Certainly the Protestant view would be that. With the suddenism. So Theravada is a gradual path of salvation. Many Mahayana have a gradual path of salvation. But some, and a few Mahayana, have a sudden path of salvation. And this is a debate. Even within Mahayana traditions like Zen, you have the suddenism of Rinzai Zen versus the gradualism of Soto Zen. That's very, very different. And so we have this statement here: the heavenly Buddha cannot raise beings immediately from the filth and the earth to the full glory of the heavenly palace. So he's debates around suddenism versus gradualism. Different conceptions of that in Christianity and Buddhism are being avoided for their theological truth claims. What is the narrative contrast Basham then is making to better explain Mahayana? Well, let's look in the text. It says, if brought at once, they would suffer agonies of fear, embarrassment, confusion, might insist on returning to the gutter again. Basham is harvesting for the purposes of this sort of contrast, this and visceral effect, the idea that helps clarify what will come up later on, the Trichia doctrine, and the reality of the six realms of existence. Mahayana thus raises one to the celestial realm, from the earthly realm, for example, to the Pure Land, where you would return and you would experience the general sufferings and so on. Might Basham have made, we could ask, a good connection? What is he saying? So they must undergo many years of preparation for their high estate, toiling amongst the material dross, earnestly and loyally striving to make the world a tidier place. The Father in the heavenly will cover his glory with earthly dust. Well, Basham here is perhaps reflecting, maybe unwittingly, C.S. Lewis' story of the great divorce. In this bit above, it really echoes Lewis's idea of a trip from hell to heaven. Hell being described as grey place, and the people of the grey place go to this super real place where even the blades of grass are so real they cut to the feet of the people from hell, and they cannot bear the reality of heaven, which is far too much. Heaven is so real. Has this a connection? Has this a real connection? That Theravada cannot bear the truth that only Mahayana can bear? That's a really interesting connection. It talks in the text of many years. So they must undergo many years of preparation. So the many years in the Lotus Sutra is describing is perhaps referring to the many lifetimes the Bodhisattva commits to, enduring the pain of rebirth for the sake of liberating all beings. Or perhaps it's more likely how the Hinayana Theravada think of renunciation that is required and the time that's committed to gain enlightenment. So it could mean several things here. There's a phrase, the dross. The dross. The dross of this world, if I can just circle it here. The dross of the material dross. Here it is, just here, of this world. Again, think about the Bodhisattva vow, which we've already discussed and commented on, and the metaphor here may make sense, or perhaps the dross is a reference to the meager world of renunciation of the Theravada, whose long time and years in devotional acts of meditation and asceticism constitute the dross that's being talked about here. The dross. So what is being tidied? So what is it talk? Striving to make the world a tidier place. We have this word tidier here. What is being tidier? Well, this might be a reference to the compassionate place with which many more, certainly Mahayana, taught about discovering their Buddha nature and becoming compassionate beings. Much tidier place than the untidy Theravada place. The Theravada who seeks vainly, merely in order to order their own self and world to seek Nibbana. In fact, seeking an ordered world, in fact, is only filling the world with dust. With dust, a great insult in Buddhism. You're just creating a more dusty world, not a tidier world, you Theravada. So who in the end is the Father so often referred to, and who is the Son in the text here? The Son. Who's the Son toiling in his Father's house? So over and over, the Father is a metaphor for the self-belief and maturity the Mahayana believe their spiritual state has achieved, in contrast to the immature Hinayana, this a sort of patronizing paternalism. In the text, Father Alan Cole argues the origins and nature of Mahayana in these texts, in the Lotus Sutra, Diamond Sutra, Tathagata Garbha Sutra, and so on. These many texts and their polemics, their sense of identity is formed through rhetoric that builds up their ethos and tears down negatively the Theravada ethos through language and through description. These writings are carefully structured, rhetorical, persuasive speech to undermine traditional monastic Buddhism and gain legitimacy and authority and credibility, rhetoric credibility for Mahayana Buddhism, as it veered away from Buddhism's older oral and institutional forms. We're talking about the early days. People lived under the same roof, but had different beliefs, hadn't yet developed their own institutions and their own places, their own viharas. The narrative structures of these polemics, of this rhetoric, this seductive literary strategy, this constant barrage of time and again insult, we're great, they're bad, suggests that's used in these sutras suggests that they were specifically written to encourage devotion to the written word of the Lotus Sutra, particularly, instead of other forms of authority, be they human, maybe the great Vihara of Sri Lanka, institution, or iconic. The true glory of the Enlightenment maybe is being referred to here. So this paternalistic metaphor is that the Father who knows best, i.e. the Mahayana, with their perfected wisdom. Father Cole is critical that the authors of these texts put humorously things that we shouldn't assume to be the case. These authors went to the school of bad faith, the kind of who's your daddy now thinking, sectarian propaganda. That's all this is. And Basham is right to identify the nature of the text being sectarian propaganda. Cole says, one of the most striking things about the Lotus Sutra is its sophisticated use of father-son motifs to explain its own identity, its Mahayana, and then insert itself as the dawning element in the creation of a new identity for the reader and his relationship to Buddhist tradition. The brilliance of this rhetoric, this political text, lies in its seduction, its seductive language, in the way it's designed as a pivot that achieves its own legitimation by offering legitimacy to the reader. You, my dear reader, know better, don't you? You're with us, is the way it's put. So what is the house and what is the true glory? The house, the true glory of enlightenment, is a reference to the teachings of Mahayana, dependent origination, sunyata, Buddha nature, Ekyana, Upaya. Perhaps in the context of the Lotus Sutra timing, probably not so much Buddha nature, certainly sunyata and dependent origination, and certainly Upaya. Father Cole agrees with the twin purposes of the text was to delegitimize Theravada and legitimize Mahayana doctrine in these fiercely polemical wars of the first few centuries AD in Buddhism. So it talks about the spirit, that the story turned to the purpose of sectarian propaganda, the spirit of the parable finally, the spirit of the parable. our interpretation to be that demanded by the spirit of the parable. Basham's footnote here are somewhat arrogant, somewhat elitist. He betrays his belief that his secular interpretation is better than the Mahayana interpretation of their own sutra. That's an interesting perspective. The value neutral Western perspective, in the end, becomes an elitist perspective, one we should be critical of. So, in this section 15, one of the key words was this word Hinayana. Well, we don't use that word. It's a derogatory, polemical word used in the Lotus Sutra, used by Mahayana to say, we're better than you. Part of the rhetoric language, the political language, the rhetoric of ethos that says our ethos is great, we're to be believed and they're not to be believed.